We're going to do this panel from the seats. Does anybody think that's a bad idea? No, that's all right. Okay, just in terms of like if you can't see us or whatever, then we're going to be sitting down here talking. It's our job. So we're all here to talk about this topic, facilitating artistic practice, which obviously is a radically evolving area, mostly in response to such buzzwords as network culture or digital lifestyles and this kind of thing. Oh, you're in. Back. So it's going to be somewhat controversial. It's going to be a bit about. We expect a lot of the people in the room to be people who are already working in this field. Is that generally true? That you kind of hear as people who are working professionally in this field of art, to some degree, not really necessarily having to define what art is or whatever. Okay, right. So, like we were saying, we're in this kind of like time of radical change where creativity is found in all different sorts of areas, of course, but we no longer define ourselves by our vocation. So historically, we have institutions which define our vocation, and they define the paradigms which you take into your practice. And that's kind of changed a lot into self-definition with network culture. So now people say, I'm an architect, or I'm a graphic designer, and it's because they've looked at a YouTube video on how to do that. So they can be whatever they want. And maybe this is starting to disintegrate what these definitions are at all. And we need to find ways to facilitate this new world, because talent is coming from anywhere and has any possible new exit from this network. So we also need to take into account other things like the time spans of things have changed, and the barriers to entry have been somewhat kind of removed but restructured. So barriers to entry exist in new places. And I think the way to think about it is we're always trying to enable the best work, of course, but there's always a problem involved in that. There's always some kind of problem. And I think this discussion is a bit about not how to get rid of that problem, but where do we want the problems to be in the future? Where will we see them when we reconfigured everything? So I'm just going to say I'm Elliot, and I run this residency called Screen Lab. I also have an art studio, and I studied physics at university, so I'm just trying to be an example of my own presentation. So this is it's a residency series, which is invisible, because it's all very dark images, because we use projectors and digital things. But we have people with like very deep association with digital technology, working in the arts, rapidly creating new works which 10 years ago might have required several million pounds to develop, but now can be done with anybody in their laptop. And this residency is all about the new superhero, the loner in their laptop, who can come into a rich media environment and fully transform it. But because you can't see what it looks like, it's just words. All right, so like I said, this is going to be discussion. It's going to be a little bit controversial. I hope that isn't a problem. I hope you're all in. Shout out when you've got any questions. And we're going to start with a proper talk with Gabby.
I don't know about that. Thanks. My name is Gabrielle Jenks, and I manage a festival called Abandoned Normal Devices. It's also known as the AND Festival. And it's a festival of new cinema, digital culture, and art, and it launched in 2009. And since its inception, it's been commissioning projects that really challenge conventional modes of participation. And that's with new forms of artistic inquiry. And the festival in itself is cross-disciplinary. It invites collaborations from the UK's pioneering tech, science, and film sectors. And in theory, we come from quite a traditional commissioning model in the sense that our founding partners are galleries and their cinemas, so FACT, Foundation for Art and Creative Technology, and Corner House, and also Folly, which was an agency based in Lancaster. So, the way in which we facilitate artistic practice is really influenced from that background. And also I'd like to say that the facilitation that we have of artists is often very logistical. It's often very producer driven, so it's about making what their ideas happen in very real terms. But I would like to say that even though some of the relationships are extremely conventional, the output can be unorthodox, and I think that really captures what AND is about. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of some of the projects we've worked on so you can get a sense of our kind of working practice. The festival takes place across the region. It's multi-locational. In the city, it hijacks spaces, it spills from the streets, outside of the gallery spaces. And the kind of projects we commission, we like to think of as Trojan horses. They sort of translate the worlds of computers and code into the public space in really engaging ways. But at the same time, they really ask and question some of the implications of these new technologies. A really good example of this, you probably can't see it very well on here, but hopefully on the plasmas, is a project by Christoph Radishko called War Veteran Vehicle. And he uses outdoor projections. They're actually probably more projectile than they are projections, and uses them to juxtapose the architectural space, the public architectural space, with the psychological space of the public. And in this scenario, he worked with veterans who'd come back from Iraq and projected their stories. And we did this in Liverpool in 2009. Another really good example of this is a project called Plan C, and this was created by new media pranksters Eva and Franco Mates, and they're well known for their subversion of public media channels, and they come from a real net art background. And the most well-known project was where they faked a suicide on chat roulette and then filmed everyone's responses to that. This particular project involved a complete, cross-platform campaign where they used video, social media, and essentially used this to create a debate around a radioactive fairground which was smuggled into the UK from Chernobyl and was actually assembled in Whitworth Park. And this involved working with robotics, quite a big production team on assembling this fairground. So because the festival is multi-locational, working in the public realm really enables you to connect with people through sight. And this is really important for us. And so we're really interested in this expanded notion of the network. So we deliver a lot of artist residencies that take place both on canals, forests, and on the railway. And this is a really good example here, where we worked with an artistic duo called Hey Hey on a new form of transport. And in this case, they were suggesting an alternative to the car, so the first mono transport system, which was we tried out on a piece of rail track between Manchester and Liverpool. And the great things about working on projects like this and working in really quite remote locations, like this was at Grisdale Forest, is connectivity and also getting access to a wide variety of people who can really feed back on this kind of work. This particular project was with some artists called Hudson Powell, and they worked in collaboration with Go Ape, which is an assault course in Grisdale, and they were working with augmented technologies and looking at how these can complement the real world environments. This is also an example around how to use a public space. This was Chris O'Shea's work at Hand from Above. So coming from a film background, we found this really useful to consider how the big screens are used in the city centre and explore the network possibilities of these urban screens. This project was extremely popular, and if anyone knows it, Chris has shared this content online. He's a big advocate for open frameworks. And what's great about it is, in this case, the screen engages with the people rather than the other way around. And having this in the city centre, people were just passing by, and then this great big hand would come and pick them up and basically move them to another space. So and tickle them and all kinds of things. So as I was saying, coming from a film background, we found this a really useful point to also consider things to do with distribution, platforms, consumption, and how, especially with the ability to download content now, some of the challenges that we're facing. So since 2009, we've been working with filmmakers and commissioning feature films. And the first one we worked on was by a director called Jamie King, who you may know from a film that he did called Steal This Film, which was basically downloaded by BitTorrents, and that's how it was distributed. And so this particular feature film, instead of going down the normal route, we went and collaborated with Babelgum and released the film through episodes online. And this was really a way of trying to cater for the way in which people are now watching films as well. So people are streaming stuff, they're watching things in box sets, in marathons, and this episodic way was really about trying to engage with those changing behaviors. And so when we think about distribution, the platform is so important, and considering what people are using, what are the platforms that they are now using to view things. And this particular project was by an artist called James Coop, when he made the first video film to be made inside Facebook. And this is really a site-specific artwork that auto-generates films based on the narrative and data collected from Facebook profiles. And similarly, when we're talking about platforms, we've also commissioned games and apps. This one was by a duo called Molia Industria. They're Italian game developers, and they produce these satirical and subversive games. This one was all around the manufacture of the iPhone. So needless to say, once we put it out, it got banned, and it is still available from the Android shop. But it actually, the window that we had where we had it up there, we did make a little bit of money. So what we found is really important working with artists, and especially who are engaging with these new technologies. By engaging with them, we get a sense of the political and social systems that are at play. So artists really interrogate in these systems, and one really good example of this is Julian Oliver. He really interrogates these technological systems and boundaries. And we worked with him on a project called Border Bumping, which he calls a work of dislocative media, where he uses mobile phone data as a marker to redefine national borders. Now, this is an app that you can download, but it's also, when we first launched the project, it was part of a touring convoy of caravans which went across the northwest. So it's been to Whitehaven, Preston, quite a lot of random places across the north. And this is actually a really complicated and quite subversive project, but we had teenagers going into these caravans in Whitehaven particularly, and watching Julian trying to communicate this project, and actually being able to, and for them to really understand it. They were leaving it saying, oh, you know, that guy's James Bond. He's like James Bond, he's got all these gadgets in there. And I think what's really important in terms of the role of a festival is actually bringing this work out to different audiences and getting their feedback. Coming back to the surface a bit, we've also worked with an artist called Raphael Rosendahl, who really can't understand why people do not treat their computer screen as a canvas. So he makes websites as artworks and sells the domain name to guarantee exclusivity to the piece. And he believes domains are the only scarce things on the internet. So these works are often really deceptively simple Flash animations. So for example, the one you probably can't, oh, you can see that, yeah. Basically, you press the switch and the background goes black. So they're really simple. But he's a good example of an artist working in different contexts, and he's been recently commissioned by Ford's advertising wing to create a design for their art car. You might have seen this on the billboards. And so he's one of many technically accomplished artists that we worked with earlier on, who operate in a really diverse economy. So we don't only just work with artists who are already technically really savvy. We work with artists who potentially might want to work with a technologist to realize an idea. And one example of this is the hearing test by an Irish composer called Eilish Narian. And we enabled a collaboration between her and a Spanish technologist called Andrea Pezos Lopez. And this was part of an online residency that we developed with Dada Fest. And this project was all about asking users to question their auditory perception. So both of them are hearing impaired, and it was the first time that they both worked in this way. And this is something we're really interested in, is enabling artists as well who may not have the skills to work with somebody who does. And as a festival, and working within the online space and in the physical space, we're constantly challenged with considering how these things manifest in a physical way and in engaging ways. This is a really good example by an artist called Ellie Harrison, and it's called A Vending Machine, which we had in situ in a cinema. And the vending machine contains a computer program which continuously scans BBC News RSS feeds, and then for anything to do with the economy. So when as soon as the economy comes up through these RSS feeds, it releases free food. So needless to say, this was a really popular piece of work, and we didn't have much food left in the vending machine. And another way we do that is in a really theatrical way. This is a fantastic project by a media artist called Jeremy Bailey, and it was called Master, Slave, Invigilator. And he's quite an accomplished artist who is interested in ideas to do with telepresence, and he wanted to solve the problem of how you could be in several places all at once. And so he operated multiple gallery interpreters who travelled around the city with his face transplanted onto their face. And he's one really good example of somebody who's bridging that territory between online, live, and visceral performances, but in a really theatrical way, where people actually don't feel alienated by it, even though that does look like a Lady Gaga outfit. So this territory of digital performance is something we facilitate the development of quite a bit, and there is a group in Liverpool called the Casimir, and they're a local artist collective. Ace is laughing here because he also works with them, and I think they were, we started working with them about 4 years ago, and they're extremely cross-disciplinary. There's coders, there's performers, there's set designers, there's builders, and they produce these productions which are sometimes very linear, sometimes episodic, and they sort of erupt in different locations. And I think that they really have quite an interesting model where they're able to sustain themselves and fund their own projects, but at the same time they're really engaging with various different audiences that wouldn't go into the gallery at all. And we worked with them over 4 years to a really large-scale event back in 2011. And most people who go to these parties that they put on say that they've been the best parties ever. So I do recommend looking at the Casimir. And just to finish on the last project, this probably seems very alien when we talk about digital practice, but this is a project that we worked on for 2 years with an artist called John O'Shea. It's called Pig's Bladder Football. And the reason it's relevant is because it involves a material of the future. The artist set out to culture the first bioengineered football grown from living cells. And we worked with the university, Liverpool University, with the clinical engineering department. And he was able to use techniques of the same techniques that you need to build artificial organs. And the process involved 3D modeling, rapid prototyping, and we were able to premiere the first bioengineered ball in the festival in 2012. And I think what's really important about this project is that it points towards an approach to art making where we're not just talking about digital tools, but we're talking more broadly about emerging technologies and the implications these have in terms of art making. So, yeah, there you go. That's a quick overview.
And now we've got Asa from MadLab, which is a local hackspace.
Yeah, something like that. Fantastic. Can everybody see that? Just over there at the back. Excellent. You have to bear with me. I'm used to standing up and waving my arms around quite a lot and kind of sort of pacing. I know. Then
I think the microphone works when you stand up. Do you want to try it?
Okay, let's give this a try.
Do what's natural.
Okay, good.
I don't think you have to even hold it. I think you just point it a bit up.
Just point it.
Or do you want to hold the microphone?
Okay, and I'll sort of stand here and kind of wave around. That's probably easier. Oh, smashing.
Do you want to stand in front of the screen as well?
Excellent. There we go.
You're right.
Yes, excellent. That's much better. You can feel sort of trapped behind sort of the keyboard. Excellent, much better. Okay, great. So I'm Asa from MadLab. So just going to very briefly kind of talk about sort of what MadLab is. I know a few people here are kind of sort of familiar with the space, but an awful lot of you aren't. And then kind of, sort of describe a little bit about sort of how kind of MadLab both intentionally and frequently unintentionally facilitates creative practice and artistic practice. So what is MadLab? I don't know if you can see this just over here, this very faint image. So this is the MadLab. It's a physical space. It's about 10 minutes walk down the road, just over in the northern quarter. opposite Common Bar. It's a 3,000 square foot former Industrial Revolution era weaver's cottage. We took it over in 2009, and ostensibly it's a community space for people who do and make interesting stuff. So it's within the context of FutureEverything. I think sort of the best way to kind of describe it is like it's the most kind of literal definition of a digital public space. It's a community space. It's a public space, and it's the kind of the peer-to-peer network and sort of knowledge sharing kind of networks that you hear an awful lot about sort of at FutureEverything. It's basically that made physical. So we set up in mid-2009 in response to, there were kind of various sort of like groups that were meeting online and forums that we were part of ourselves, people who set it up. And there were the occasional sort of meetups that happen in the backs of pubs. Frequently, of course, these things get double booked. And in the playoff between, say, a paying gig and a group of sort of computer like programmers and sort of coders, inevitably sort of like the kind of wedding parties and things win. So there were kind of various sort of groups that kind of met up, where they would get sort of shunted from one place to the next to the next. They only had kind of like crammed into like these tiny little rooms. We're like, well, wouldn't it be great if there was an actual like space that was like where these people could meet up and these different kinds of sort of groups could meet up. And so that was kind of what sort of led to, or one of the things that sort of led to the forming of MadLab. So what do we do, or what happens? These images are really faint, but they're about kind of, we do all kinds of different things. So we've got sort of various like meetups that happen. So there's now around about sort of between 50 and 60 kind of sort of informal meetups that happen every month, covering all kinds of things from, yes, lots of programming. So tonight I think we've got the Ruby programming language, their user group are meeting up to talk about startups. We've got the Python programming group are meeting up as well on the next floor, which is entertaining, as they're kind of Ruby and Python are both programming languages that are, there's a lot of crossover between those two. We also have a professional development course in Omniversity, which is, again, it's kind of sort of come out of a lot of the sort of meetups and the kind of different communities that use the MadLab. Sort of the kind of interesting people that sort of like come out of the woodwork, like Elliot is one of our Omniversity.
One of your creations.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I think it's probably the other way around. He teaches on our VVVV projection mapping course as part of the Omniversity.
You keep calling it that.
What is it? Okay, it's VVVV, not projection mapping course. Yeah, okay. We also we host kind of conferences. We hold sort of interesting kind of one-off events. So I think we're hosting like the Open Data Innovation Hack Day that's part of FutureEverything, and all kinds of just sort of interesting stuff. We have hosted exhibitions, which has been challenging. It's MadLab is, by its very definition, it gets used by so many different kind of people that it's not a neutral space. It's a chaotic, messy space. It's not a white cube. But we have had kind of sort of exhibitions that sort of fit in alongside that, which have been like suitably interesting. So just very quickly, have a show of hands. So if I say the word hacking, who understands what I mean, and it's not credit cards? Okay, so that's about sort of like 50-50, I guess, from the audience. So a lot of the groups, a lot of the kind of communities that sort of meet up at MadLab would self-define as hackers. And in this instance, when we talk about hacking, we're not talking about like nicking credit cards. We're talking about the creative and playful misappropriation of technology. So, for instance, I guess that like this thing just here, if you can see it, would be a particularly good example of that. So this is a Twitter drum that one of the that somebody from the local electronics group from the Hackspace Manchester created. That you send it messages via Twitter and it plays entertaining drum patterns and kind of cheerful tunes. You kind of like tweet at it and it kind of plays interesting tunes. So you know, it's kind of it's playing around with the Twitter API with kind of different technologies. You know, just kind of interesting stuff. And I suppose that's kind of a really simple sort of I suppose example of kind of what we would describe as hacking. So about 50-50 for hacking. What about hack spaces? How many people here are aware of kind of what a hack space is? Okay, that's kind of sort of about a quarter to a third. Okay, good. So there's so hack space is, in very simple terms, a place where sort of hacking occurs. So this kind of is sort of a focal point for people that are interested in sort of exploring technology and kind of sort of and playing around with technology. It's a physical space where this kind of stuff can happen, which is, you know, it's fully equipped with loads of tools, all these kinds of things. You know, so that people can kind of get together and sort of play around with technology and kind of sort of do interesting things with technology. So MadLab is, as Elliot kind of described us, you know, sort of when he introduced us, is it both is and it isn't a hack space. I think the description that we've had of MadLab before, which I kind of like, is it's either a cultural institution hiding a hack space, or it's a hack space hiding a cultural institution, which I think is just is just great. It perfectly describes kind of.
Wasn't there also the youth club for adults? Wasn't that the other one?
And a youth club for adults. It gets called all sorts of things. It's, and a sort of release valve for kind of creatives and all kinds of stuff. But I do particularly like the description of sort of of MadLab as a cultural institution and a hack space combined. I suppose, sort of from our point of view, there are many different varieties of hack space. The one that we're sort of most interested in is kind of, rather than the sort of hack space model whereby you have kind of a community of people that's sort of that's very kind of like self-serving. It's kind of open that anybody can join the community, but then the idea is that you service the community. MadLab was very much set up on the basis that it's not community but communities, and it's very kind of outward facing. And the idea is to kind of sort of create kind of more communities and get more sort of people kind of tinkering with the technology and kind of doing interesting things with it. So again, you can't see it, but this guy over in the middle is Mitch Altman from a space called Noisebridge in San Francisco, which was a real kind of key inspiration for us. It's an absolutely fantastic space. If you're ever over in Mission in San Francisco, you should definitely visit. It was set up in mid-90s, and you go in there, and it's just this absolutely this like powerfully creative space. It's absolutely fantastic, and this was like a really key place for us. So where does this fit in with sort of like facilitating creative practice? I suppose the MadLab is not a single community. It's several different, frequently overlapping communities. It's kind of a chaotic, sort of messy space. It's not a monoculture. It's very kind of it's a very diverse culture. I think the thing that kind of the key feature of a lot of the people that kind of come to MadLab is that well, there's nothing wrong with like paycheckers and turning up and like working and collecting your paycheck and going home. The people that come to MadLab, by and large, really aren't that. It self-selects for people who are really curiosity-driven, for people that are really keen to communicate what they do to others. It's very much sort of a social space, so you can get together and kind of talk around the kind of stuff that you're doing. And there's sort of various different motivations for doing this. So you have kind of sort of people who are involved in startups who are interested in kind of exploring technology as a way to kind of sort of finding kind of new areas that have been untapped that they can kind of sort of create new businesses out of. Yes, we have a very big sort of wider artistic community of kind of sort of people who are really interested in sort of how they can kind of use these sort of new technologies and the things that they find out about and learn about at MadLab within their own creative practices. And then there's just there are just people who are just generally kind of sort of perpetually curious. I suppose of which I am one. So where MadLab fits into all of this is that we're not gatekeepers. It is like saying earlier on, it's kind of part of sort of peer-to-peer. It's a network culture where I suppose we act as sort of signposters. The thing that we're really keen on is new communities forming, which is kind of great. There's definitely a sort of a DIY and kind of punk ethos to what happens at MadLab. The old sort of like kind of punk punk thing of like, okay, so here's a chord, here's another chord, great, start a band. This is, goes like, I'm interested in the thing, find someone else that's interested in it, find somebody else that's interested in it, great, start a community. And that's happened time and time again at MadLab, which is really, really important. So if you're in Manchester, you should bob over and come and have a look and kind of see what we're up to. All kinds of things happening. We're setting up a shop quite soon as well. That's going to be heartily entertaining.
It's not MadLab, that's your private thing. You can't just plug your own stuff.
No, we're setting up we're setting up an official MadLab shop.
Oh, okay, right.
It's a MadLab shop, not a shoppy shop. Right. No, oh God, no, it's not my shop. Last time I worked in a shop, I got sacked. So, yeah, there's definitely not. So yeah, anyway, come along and have a look at madlab.org.uk as well, which is kind of about the most sort of sensible place where you can kind of find out about exactly what's going on. And yeah, come down and sort of enjoy the kind of serendipitous chaos and mess and interestingness. This is the MadLab. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I'm Julie Freeman. I'm going to talk to you today a bit about my work. I'm an artist. I'm a digital artist. And so I'm coming at the kind of this session from a practitioner perspective. Well, one of the things I just want to say up front is that in the blurb about this session, it says this is kind of like a how to be a digital artist session. And there is no how to. You know, if you're making digital art, you are a digital artist. There's no kind of path. There's no secret to what happens. So if you're expecting that, then you're going to be disappointed.
Do you want to give them 2 minutes to leave? Or?
Yeah. But I'm still going to tell you what I did. So I'm going to dazzle you all the way through this presentation with a really high-end data representation of my career that I think you'll really appreciate. Oh, God.
Is that being mirrored? Or?
Oh, okay.
Oh, that should be coming out, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Just one moment, please. Oh, yeah, it's coming out.
Yeah.
Just try that again.
It is really faint.
But I just boosted all the...
Just try again on that one. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I just tried to boost the contrast, so you can't see it. Anyway, so I've been working in this field for probably about 20 years, and I'll run through roughly the various things that have happened to me and where I feel like I've been a facilitator for other people and for other artists, or where I've been facilitated. And they seem to, just looking at an overview for this, they seem to sort of flip between one and another, and they're quite integrated. So my first foray into the digital arts was I set up a company in London called Studio Fish back in 1994. And we were working as a bunch of artists in a sort of commercial arena doing CD-ROM work, occasionally internet stuff, but it was at the very start of the web being widely accepted. So we were doing a lot of screen-based kiosks and work for the Hayward Gallery and the Science Museum. And that really interested me, just as a sort of commercial art perspective, really. And then as in all artists' career, I had a major personal trauma, and my father died. I had a complete flip out, and he was the chairman of our company, and I found that going to work for Studio Fish every day was just too much. So I drifted sideways and went to do an MA. So I did a master's in digital art, and it was at that point, which is that my perspective on everything I'd been doing changed, because we were doing 50% fine art and 50% C programming. So I learnt to code, but I learnt to code and use it in an artistic manner. So we learnt a lot of artificial life programming. We did a lot of subversion stuff. We did things that were really non-application based, non-commercial, just general fun stuff. So after my master's, I went back to Studio Fish, and we completely changed our direction. I wanted to do more arts-led stuff, less education, less commercial work. And then we moved on to do some very large kind of commercial artworks for people like Gestetner. And this was a piece of work that was called the Digital Wave. And back then, so this was 1998, you could call things digital something because people weren't using digital technology as we do today. And this was shown at the ICA and the Science Museum, and it was a huge interactive fabric wave with a series of animated projections on it. So this was the first sort of art work that Studio Fish as a commercial organisation produced. And off the back of this, it provided lots more opportunities to do similar kinds of things. We were a bunch of 7 artists doing Studio Fish, and we had staff that ranged up to, it kind of fluctuated between 25 and just the 7 of us. And after 7 years, I don't know if it was the 7-year itch, I don't know quite what happened, but we all sort of fragmented, everything began to fall apart, and we closed the company down and all went off in different directions. And that was completely, it was completely unplanned, it was very amicable. We all did that, and I went off and just did stuff. I started looking around for other people that were in the same position as me, and I did some freelance work. And then I was lucky enough to be nominated for a Nesta fellowship. And Nesta, at the time, were giving out these arts fellowships to people to do whatever they wanted to. So they were quite substantial sums of money. And I got one that lasted for about 2.5 years, just to produce my own work. And that period of time was, I mean, I felt really lucky at the time. I also felt a huge amount of pressure to deliver something, because they'd just gone, you know, here's some money, here's some equipment, go off and do whatever you need to do. And it was very unmanaged, and I think Nesta at the time were trying to facilitate artists in this way, but they didn't give us any parameters, they didn't give many boundaries. So there was some people, you know, ended up with new kitchens out of their fellowship money. I ended up making a piece of work that went on to be quite successful, called The Lake, which was an animated, you know, you can't see it. I tagged fish in their natural environment, and I used their motion in real time to generate sound and animation in a site-specific work that was by a lake in Bedfordshire. So the whole Nesta experience gave me the ability to build my own software and hardware frameworks, and it meant that I could go out and meet people and talk about my work, and it really broadened my ability to network and brought me new connections that allowed me to carry on making different projects through various commissions. After the Nesta project, I got a Wellcome Trust Award to work as an artist in residence, working with nanotechnologists, which is really interesting. And I spent about 2 years on and off working with them, again, facilitated financially by the Wellcome Trust, which is another thing that I think is something that has helped my career. I've been really lucky in terms of receiving funding from places. And I wonder, in terms of being a digital artist, often if you're building big installations, there's a lot of money and time, there's a lot of coding that goes on, there's a lot of expertise that you need, there's a lot of custom hardware often in what you're doing. And also, so it ends up quite expensive. So to be a practitioner on your own, just working in the shed, doing your own stuff, it's actually quite difficult to produce these large projects without some sort of financial help. After the Wellcome Trust, when I made a series of artworks that were huge posters that looked like they were computationally generated, but actually were hand drawn. Okay. So after that, during that time, I had this kind of freedom to work out, well, I've had quite a lot of people helping me along the way, and this is over a period of maybe, 7 or 8 years. So I got to the point where I thought, well, I need to work out how I can sustain my practice without relying on government funding, without relying on people giving me fellowships, which come along very infrequently. So I set up Signal Arts Group, which is a low-cost studio provider. I also co-founded something called Market Project, which is a professional and personal development agency for artists in the east of England, where we run events such as Collecting the Uncollectible, and get people to discuss that, curators, artists, the Arts Council. And also events such as Are There Too Many Artists was one of the ones, to see whether or not there was too many artists. Is that why everyone is possibly struggling financially to make ends meet, because there's, not enough money to go around to help everybody move on. I also then started to do a PhD. I got a TED fellowship as well, which was very useful in making connections. And I know that there's a talk tomorrow night about that it's going to be fairly anti-TED, which is kind of the whole thing.
Brings it into question.
It brings it into question. But it's very interesting that I'll probably try and chip in then. But the whole idea of the TED conference versus the TED website is very different. So I'm really pleased and quite proud to be a fellow because it's facilitated so many connections for me and people that I would never normally have a chance to meet. And then, so now I'm doing a PhD. It's interesting, the PhD I'm doing is called Media and Arts Technology, and it's a doctoral training centre. By the time we take in September, there's going to be 60 media artists like PhD students on the scheme, and they've given us at Queen Mary University, we've got a lab, we've got a lot of equipment, we've got lots of facilities from the materials department, there's a nanotechnology department, there's biology. We've got access to all this, so it's very much a way for these 60 students, to do what we want to do in a formal educational environment. So it's quite unusual. It's an experiment, and it's quite unusual. It's turning out, so far, it's really brilliant. And part of what I was doing there, I'm working very much at the moment with data and open data and how artists are using data. So off the back of that, I curated a series of artworks for the Open Data Institute. And again, this is back to me then facilitating other artists in doing things that I guess I'd like to be doing myself, which is having work in unusual places. And this is a work by Stanza, which isn't showing up so well. And it is driven by environmental data that runs off his own sensors that he's got placed around his house. And it's a kind of life-sized 3D representation of the artist's body. It's quite substantial in the ODI's offices. And this is another piece by Fabio Latanzi Antinori, which you really can't see, which is a smart material sculpture that uses news feeds, 6 or 7 different news feeds, to look for crimes against humanity. So it looks for references to genocide, crimes of aggression, and provides this constant kind of flickering reminder that these crimes are being perpetrated all the time. And it's a very interesting work because it's really beautiful, and it looks very, it looks almost sort of religious in the siting of the offices that it's in the Open Data Institute's offices. But actually the people that are working there, once they understand what the data is about and where it's coming from, they have this kind of relationship with it where they think it's actually really lovely to have it in the office, but it's reminding me of this depressing stuff all the time. I quite like that. The dark side of me quite likes that. So just to really finish, this is, you know, as I've been thinking about my work and my career for this panel, I've fluctuated between facilitating myself, which is really important. You need to be able to, if you're an artist, you want to practice your own work. But actually the way that that has happened for me is that I've been facilitating others, and then the benefits of that have rolled round so that I can then do something. So I think that the play-off between both, if you can get involved with other people, the community things that the AND Festival do and that MadLab do, is all about bringing people together that will then facilitate you to make sure that you can do what it is you need to do yourself.
Great.
And that's, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, everyone's obviously got very great presentations, so I didn't want to cut too short. We've got 15 minutes left to chat. So I think I'll probably start with one of the points which you raised, which was, are there too many artists? It's a nice contentious question to ask. I think what I want to say, though, is there's a difference in the ability of artists now, there's a difference in the type of ability that artists have. Often they now can also have a technical ability, which means they're able to survive in an environment in which they're not commonly funded, because they can be an engineer for someone for a day. This can become an emerging pattern. If you've got an artist who's also an engineer, they can survive on the pay of the engineer. Does this mean that, do we think that this is changing the landscape of creatives? Does anyone want to start on that?
Well, I would just say that the event we held where we asked, is there too many artists? The overwhelming response was, no, of course there's not, that's ridiculous. There can never be too many artists. But the point that you made, you could say that if you're a visual artist, you could have worked in the graphic design industry. Or if you're a photographer, you could work in commercial photography. So I think depending on what artist you are, you could always reach into another industry to make money. I'm not sure if that's unique to the technology digital art.
I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a economic requirement for people who are eloquent with technology right now. I mean, in terms of making websites, in terms of making database systems, or a lot of the time helping other people make their art projects. You might be brought in to help them make it, and a lot of the time that paid work comes from a skill. And if the thirst for skill now is for technical ability, is that meaning that the artists who are surviving this field? Sorry, this is a really long question. I'll try and shorten it down. You know what I mean. Are we killing off artists who haven't got technical ability?
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
I mean,
Just quite simply, no.
It's not my belief.
No, I mean, I think because we talk, I mean, it's an evolving conversation, this, isn't it? Because there's been many artists, whether they're worked with computers as computer scientists or artists working with biomaterial. It's about a craft. And I think some people are craftsmen, some people come with an artistic concept, can think conceptually as well. I think it's about people working together, I'll be honest. And I think we underestimate how many artists really need as well support and development and can't, that actually can't communicate some of the things that they wanted to do. So the technical people actually just need to speak to the right people. I don't think it's either or. I just think there's just evolving practices and they're becoming more diverse, which is good.
I've got some other questions I've actually prepared, which might be more interesting. No, sorry, my question. Oops. I'm doing really badly today. I didn't even know I was going to be here. Right. People often talk about the cooperation between technical communities and creative communities. Is that still a meaningful thing to discuss in our time? Because is it the case now where there is no longer a stark difference between the two? Asa.
Yeah, go on. Excellent. Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Having just completed a 2-week artist's residency at the Arts Catalyst down in London, which was brilliant, awesome experience, somewhat confusing because I'm not an artist. And we were also put up as an artist residence, and sort of on the very first day we sort of introduced as, sort of, hello, you're our first artists who are staying. We were kind of going like, at what point do we tell everyone that we're not artists? So yeah, I mean, the distinctions are certainly very blurry as to what's what. I mean, I think it was interesting that I think there was we had to be described as artists, even despite what we were doing not necessarily sort of fitting. It wasn't not part of an artistic practice, but it had to be described in this way in order to sort of fit into the kind of the frameworks and sort of funding frameworks and kind of organisational framework that was there. I mean, what we were doing was certainly of artistic benefit or creative benefit, running an amateur biotechnology laboratory public so that anybody can kind of come in and get involved and kind of do stuff. For 2 weeks, and there was an awful lot of crossover. We had people from Goldsmiths down and sort of various sort of practitioners. But yeah, absolutely, so we had to be described as artists in order to facilitate that. So
I think I've been in a similar position where, well, for about 2 years, when people were calling me an artist, where's the tense there? People were calling me an artist. Is that English? Yeah, people were calling me an artist, and I was calling myself a designer. I don't think it's not necessary for someone to self-define, I think, so strongly in order for them to have value in an artistic community.
Yes, yeah, quite. But yeah, I think it was interesting just that, that's in order to kind of sort of fit into this sort of framework, we had to be described as artists.
Okay.
But then these frameworks are very hybrid, and this is hybrid practice, which, includes designers, technologists, artists, and I think that's the way that people have been talking about this kind of practice.
Yeah, it's the semantics, isn't it? I think nearly all the technologists I know are all very creative in the way that they work, and a lot of the scientists as well. And I think that you know, there is the art of science, there is the art of music, there is, so I think artists in that sort of more old-fashioned historical sense, we are all artists, even though we're practicing visual art or science or...
Yeah, and of course, any panel which ends up with the question, what is art, you need to...
Yeah.
I need to steer it away quick. Whoops. Yeah, so it is becoming the case whereby I think personally that the way people define themselves is becoming less and less important if they're using titles which are from shared communities, only in which the way you define your work is the important title. Would you agree that it's important as people approach these initiatives to understand the role which they play as either a technician or an artist?
Yes, but I think I think it's about intention as well. It's about the intention of the people that are part of that production, you know, or project, and I think that can distinguish the designer from the artist in a sense, I think. And also, I don't know if this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly on the design side, it does seem to be a lot more speculative in many ways. Whereas with we certainly work with a lot of artists that are really working to realise these things in very real terms.
Mm-hmm. Did you have something to say?
No, that was just a nod.
Okay. That's a statement itself.
Yes.
One of the questions which I wanted to try and form here is, are we sufficiently moving people from so we were identifying a lot of new groups in the community which are able to create creative work of value. So either they're coming from IT and they're making some work about that, or they're coming from I don't know, like bio or something like this, and these works are coming through. Are we sufficiently enabling these people to have professional careers, or are we only displaying this work as in, like, are we enabling these people to make a living in the northwest of England? I think is the question. Where are you from?
London.
Oh, okay. Right.
Everyone makes a living there.
Yeah, it's easy. It's cheap.
I would say probably no.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's really difficult for artists who are certainly working with emerging forms to communicate what they're doing and to a number of different people. I think unless you're working within universities and research areas, or everyone knows how difficult it is to sustain themselves as an artist, and how you have to almost jump from residencies or wait for grants or commissioning, that I think it's very difficult for you to actually build, for it to be reliable or to enable them to just do only that.
Right,
yeah, so I just, and on that, money is really generally a sort of unpopular subject to talk about, but it's always super relevant. And I think with the maker community, the MadLabs and stuff, it's all really brilliant on that. But I wonder if it sets all the self-starting stuff, which is all very, I'm going to say big society, but it's kind of that thing, isn't it? It's like doing it for yourself, and that, which is really brilliant. To set a precedent for all artists to be working in that way, then who's going to expect to then have to provide money for artists to actually do stuff? So there's a I don't want to be negative about it in any way.
I think it's great to be negative. It's how the future happens.
Yeah, you're rubbish.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for saying that. I'll get you later. Right, so we've got 5 minutes left. Who's got a question? Do the usual thing, you put your hand up. Or you can think about something you want to ask, and then maybe I can make a question for the time being. How's that sound? Go on, go ahead.
I was just wondering, it sounds like with MadLab, that the kind of things that come out, projects that come out of it are very much organic.
Just run around this way.
Sorry, can you? Oh, sorry. Hello, sorry. Ooh. I was just saying, with MadLab, it sounds like the projects that come out are very much organic, but with A&D, it sounds like the relationships that are forged between technologists and artists are more kind of, not controlled, but perhaps kind of match-made. And I just wondered what sort of if there were any curatorial processes that we're going through, how you kind of set up those relationships and how you see them through, and kind of if there's a kind of brief at the beginning of where you want it to go, or whether or not it's just we'll see what happens and play it by ear.
Mm-hmm. I'll be honest. I would never force a collaboration, because when we have done it, it hasn't turned out in the way that in the most effective way possible. So when we certainly like set it parameters with projects, particularly with the residency one, where we actually, there was points where we said, is this working, is it not? And that was part of the contract, and that meant that they didn't have to just complete it and live with it and work with each other for the entire project. Sometimes it's luck, and it depends very much on the artist. So with the Pig Splatter football project, where we had an artist in residence at the university, you're very dependent on personalities, and obviously depending on the university for the resources. So I think it's about being aware of the rules of engagement as well. So respecting each other's spaces, and but choosing the right artists as well to work in those contexts. So for example, some artists would really not want to go to Whitehaven and be sat in a caravan talking about their work. So you almost you bear this in mind, and you have to, when you're setting a brief, you make that very clear that you are going to be doing that. So yeah, it's very clear briefs. It's with a lot of the projects that are very driven by research and development, it's checking in at certain points and ensuring that they're happy with it, or if it needs to go down another tangent, we can change that, and we can make sure that they still get the outcome that we want. So yeah, it's different, but I think forced collaborations I would deter away from them if you can do, just because. Or at least set up parameters where you can make those changes halfway. Yeah.
I had there was an instance of a scientist and an artist, and they worked together on a very long project, and about 18 months, and over time they just completely fell out. They both really needed each other to get the project done. When they came to do their final presentation, the animosity that was on the stage as they did their panel discussion was really entertaining, and they were like, so they kind of ended up embracing the negativity that had gone on, and it was really good because you don't normally see that. You don't normally see the other side.
Yeah, I think also that I think there's pros and cons to both, because we have a few relationships which are more organic. So the one that we have for the Casimir, for example, which is a similar setup to MadLab, and we work with him in a very open way with very little parameters around the relationship. But there's also something really informal about that, and that can come with its own issues as well, where you have like a community working together, and there's all the politics within a community, and you don't have really very strict rules or guidelines around what you're wanting and what you want the outcomes to be. So I think there's like pros and cons to both approaches, and you probably found that, Asa, working within a sort of maker scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's important to say that sort of MadLab is it begins with the grassroots communities that sort of form kind of in and around MadLab, but often out of that have come curated projects and longer form projects. I suppose in creating a very kind of open space to begin with, it gives people time to kind of find people that they want to collaborate with, and sort of and understand a little bit more the kind of sort of the technologies that they're looking at, and kind of some of the sort of areas they want to go into. And there have been some very kind of natural collaborations that have come out of things at MadLab that have kind of developed into more sort of meaningful things. I mean, we've done several university collaborations, which is always interesting. There's always a tension between wanting to formalize and set up the research questions from the outset, and giving projects the space to be able to kind of sort of explore and sort of find the kind of find what kind of direction they're going to go in. I suppose a good example of that would be the Patchworks project that we ran with Lancaster University, which kind of sort of started off with this very sort of like sci-fi premise of working with Signposts, an organisation for hard-to-reach communities in Morecambe. And there's this sci-fi premise that we're going to create this kind of sort of futuristic technology that was kind of like a patch that you slapped on yourself, and you could download apps that would, I don't know, like tweak your serotonin levels or some kind of stuff. It was just this ridiculous idea that kind of was sort of like the starting point. And then when we came to sort of deliver the project, we were like, great, well that's just ridiculous. We can't do that in 8 months. So what do we do? Sort of went off on a sort of tangent of, okay, so technology that improves health and well-being of hard-to-reach communities, and we took several kind of like different tangents and turns during that whole process, which if we were working with organisations that perhaps more kind of sort of used to more structure, would have been kind of quite frustrating. We went through sort of variously looking at sort of mobile personal technology. We were looking at sort of like bacterial sampling and sort of aerosol sampling of housing, to kind of see if we could sort of visualize sort of like poor quality and good quality housing, to kind of sort of like demonstrate that if you're in a hard to reach community, you're probably living in somewhere that's moldy. Went off on a different tangent. The thing we ended up delivering was completely different again. So yeah, there are some kind of interesting tensions there, but so it's a continuum. It's not that sort of at one end you have rigidly structured projects, at the other you have kind of an open space where sort of anything goes, and yeah, invariably the answer, the correct path to take is somewhere in the middle.
The middle way, as Buddha says.
Yeah.
Have we got one more question from the audience? We do. It's in there somewhere. Just have to find it. All right, well, we're supposed to leave now, actually, but do you guys got anything you want to talk about?
I think there's one thing that we haven't really mentioned, but it's been sort of said informally that I think is really important, is artists working with artists and in different levels of their career. So it's something that we tried out a few times, and it's the benefit of it's been really, we've really felt that, and the artists have felt that. So you have somebody who's just starting out, or maybe mid-level career, working with somebody who's more established, and that being a bit more of a mentoring role, or them working on a project together. And I think that in terms of facilitation, that's actually been more useful than working with organisations sometimes for enabling that.
And how does that matchmaking happen generally? Do people already know each other in this case?
Well, in our case, it's been people have met at a festival, at the festival, and they've spoken, and then they've come back to do something, and we've worked on something bigger, and then it's grown over a few years, and then now we've tried to formalise it more. But I've found that that's something that people, particularly the artists, have said has been really useful.
Yeah, and that's with the market project, the research we've been doing over the last few years. We've kind of come to the same conclusion, and we're just putting together that whole kind of idea of mentoring in a very personal way, trying to getting the arts organisations to pay for it, but then actually keeping them out of the loop a little bit, so it becomes very much about the artists and the work they're making, rather than all the sort of the baggage that goes around it. Yeah, that's great.
And one final question is, do you think artists make particularly good commissioners?
I think they make fair commissioners.
I mean, you don't have to be absolute in general, but just in a few case studies, you've seen it happen, or you think that?
For me, well, the commissioners that this is the first time I commissioned was the Open Data Institute stuff.
And you were obviously good at that.
And I was brilliant at that, amazing. But I think financially everything was very open and very even, and we did that so that we can open up the budget to everyone afterwards, and because it's open data. And we're
running till 1:30. Yeah. Oh,
got another
half an hour. Oh, sorry. we're going to suffer a bit longer.
I love hacker spaces and hacker culture because I'm an engineer and an artist, and it's just the most natural thing to me. And what I love about them is that they've become an oasis, because I've sort of, quite honestly, battled for years with sort of, with the electronic music scene, for example. Suddenly I found the hacker spaces and Dorkbot, and everything goes, and anybody can join, and it's just about your ideas. And what I love about it is there's sort of true diversity. I don't just mean sort of gender diversity, I mean there's sort of diversity of types of people, and the idea of who can be considered to be an artist. And I'm wondering if there are a few tricks from hacker culture that people in the top-down sort of commissioning could learn, because what I'm really worried about is as hacker culture is going above the radar, that suddenly the old ways are going to creep in, and I actually want it to feed through in the other direction. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It also touches on this point, which I've been. You can see I'm coming here with an agenda. I've said some things which aren't necessarily questions. And about this point about people who define themselves as artists, or who gets defined as an artist. And I think traditionally these tiles have always been from you study art, you're an artist, something like that, or you make some art and people are famous, and then you're an artist. And now, as Asa was talking about, it's very tricky to try and keep hold of that way of defining things, because there's this beautiful new way making creative things and using whichever title you like for it. It's a hack, it's art, it's whatever. And I think some people believe that necessarily there's something about institutions which fights that definition. That an institution is there, I'm batting on it again. If I get too wordy, just tell me off. And institutions, they want to be able to define what they are. They want to be able to say, I'm this is why I get money. You know, they've got to be able to justify themselves on a grand scale over the period of 10 years or something like that. So like, something which is obvious requires no definition. And something which is obvious is generally a grassroots thing. Something that's obvious comes out from several people being in the same room together with the right facilities, then obvious things happen. And obvious things are the things which don't have the definition. And I think I'm disallowing each other, I'm stopping each other answering this question. I'm kind of being in the way, but I think that in itself, institutions have got a necessary problem with trying to work in that way, which is inherent in the way which they're built.
Well, I think that an indication of that happening is where you see people like these are Rewired State and Caper, who are two London organisations, and they're offering these kind of hack services, organising hack services for commercial organisations that just go, I can't handle this, but we know it's got to happen in our organisation. Can you bring it to us? So that, I think that because people are paying for it, organisations are paying for it, that it is happening. But also the loosening up of the way things are managed is, once things are tight already, they can only get looser. I don't think that commercial organisations can start to lock down any further than they are already. So people like the Open Data Institute, they're very kind of free and easy. You can come and go whenever you want. They don't have, you don't have to check in your time and stuff like that. They have a very different way of working. And Nesta are the same. They've got a very, they're a much more fluid organisation, or seem to be heading that direction. I think that when people like Asa from MadLab start to be employed in these organisations, then the way that he works is going to start to permeate properly into those organisations. But from the outside, you know, it's harder.
Do you feel employable? Because sometimes I feel that I'm not employable. In those sorts of organisations, that there isn't a home for me because I'm a hacker, if you like. I don't know how to put it. I don't sound a bit naff, but you know what I'm trying to say. There isn't a home for us yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of quite the opposite.
Yeah.
I personally, I love the use and abuse of the word hack. You know, anyone that's stuck something back together with blue tack is a hacker. You know, it's just so we had this brilliant when we're getting loads of hackers together and everything gets described as a hack. You know, it's like there's hack your sandwich by like adding some unusual ingredient to it, and all of a sudden you're a sandwich hacker. Brilliant. It's just utter use and abuse of the word sort of hack and hacker and hacking.
The word hack.
Exactly, hacker hacking. It's just it's absolutely great. I mean, I think that
surgery.
oh yeah, that's literal hacking, hack and slash. Yeah, no, that's quite the opposite. I think there's eminently employable.
I think it's far more complicated than how we're talking about it, though, particularly in terms of institutions and arts institutions, because they're getting funding for different reasons, and the ethos around hacking and that kind of community, to appropriate that as well within. We have to be careful about appropriating that in terms of an institution as well. And I think people want to be associated with places like MadLab, whereas they might not want to be associated with something like that at the Tate, and I think there's different scales of institutions as well, where there's that they're actually born out of that kind of community. So places like FACT, and specifically where they're working with creative technologists all the time, and have come from a very small agency model to a building and had to face those challenges of bringing people now into a building rather than actually working as an agency across the city with a small collective of people. I don't think there's like one answer to the question, but I would say that certainly working from a producer model, that somebody who'd call themselves a hacker or working with technology in a variety of experimental and playful ways is something that you would want part of your team. And I just don't think, I've never really been in a situation where no one would want to employ somebody like that. So it was alien.
I think this issue of trust, isn't it? If you can trust a hacker, now that it's changed so much in our general use of the word, that you can trust a hacker to come up with something interesting and exciting. So it's just been reframed, and the more these projects happen, the more it gets reframed into the positive, which means it might be more adopted.
It's also quite interesting that, you know, sort of like following sort of what's happening in sort of in the kind of startup world and Silicon Valley and Silicon Roundabout, you're starting to see a kind of an adoption of sort of companies that are starting to treat their own internal R&D departments as hack spaces, and kind of introducing sort of people with that sort of like, you know, sort of creative kind of intent into their organisation. So like organisations like IDEO, who've been around for a long time, a sort of design agency who can sort of very much kind of come from that sort of like, you know, playful kind of hacking kind of sort of background. You know, like hear about even organisations like Disney and even like Microsoft Research, who essentially, you know, I mean, there's an awful lot of sort of like hackers and hacking that happens inside Microsoft Research, which is great. You know, a lot of what Microsoft Research is in particular is just absolutely fantastic. If any of those things ever made it into Microsoft Office, I would buy it in an instant. But awesome. But you know, they're very much there as a kind of the sort of the creative side of things as well. So
there's, in terms of just a little story about Microsoft Research. A friend of mine did some Hack the Connect quite a few years ago, and he put his stuff up on YouTube, and then Microsoft Research had followed him, found his stuff on YouTube, and then they shipped him over to their offices in Seattle, and he installed his like Connect Hack stuff in their visitor centre. So they, you know, so they're definitely keeping an eye on that, keeping an eye on the hacker culture that's out there, and then bringing it into their space. It's really good.
And there's also I think on a different branch of this conversation, the relationship between hackers and institutions doesn't necessarily have to be institutions having hackers. It can be hackers hacking institutions. There's something we talk about a lot with ScreenLab is hacking the institution which is funding us. We know what we want to do. We have an idea about the resources they have. We think we can appropriate them in this way, but there's no mechanism there for that to happen. And necessarily, therefore, you're hacking that institution in order for it to happen. The mentality of hacking can be applied, not necessarily just to handwork or to coding or to something else, but to this bit, set of hand gestures, institution. And so, sorry, I mean, I always do this. I end up ruining my point. An institution in itself is just a mechanism, right? A mechanism is defined by a bunch of definitions here, there. Somebody's job's this, somebody's job's this, somebody's job's this. So you go, okay, I need to get this done. I need to go through this loop here. I need to dodge that person. I have to walk past them without them noticing me. I have to get into this room, and I have to use this thing to do this recording, which is going to be on this bit. And then we're going to have this video that comes out here. And the end of it, we're going to have a project which they never can officially commission because it's nothing like what their institution is made to make. So hackers have this other role, which is to be an institutional hacker, to be the person who hacks an institution to do something which it's not supposed to do. Was that off topic?
No, but I think it made me think of subversion more than hacking.
Yeah, I think that's it, yeah.
Hacking sounds cool.
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
Good use of the
Well,
word
it's
hack.
very, isn't it? It's very zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Sort of almost substituting creativity using hacking. It's just being creative.
I think the way in which I use the word, which will be different from everybody else, is reappropriating something against its initial purpose. So something which has a design purpose, you're necessarily doing something which is not part of that design purpose. So creativity definitely has that. Creativity is about using what is available to make something which has not been thought of before, and the overlap between the two is obviously very strong. The reason why I said hacking in this instance with the institution is you're doing something which actually breaks part of the design of the institution. Like when you often when you're hacking an object, right, you're making a drum that tweets, you're probably like drilling a hole in it or sticking something on it that's not supposed to be there. And that's kind of like a little bit what hacking is. It's making that change in a way which goes against what it's designed for, but to do something which which wasn't satisfied before. Is that, how do you feel about it?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I could extend the argument and say that, well, artists have been doing that, you know, people working
Yeah.
on creative
Definitely, yeah.
sculpture, people have always been pushing the boundaries of the medium they choose to work within.
Mhm.
So this is like an extension of creativity. And And I'm really interested because a lot of the stuff you're saying is what traditional artists and art, aesthetics and creativity talk about. These are the kind of issues. How do we fund ourselves? How do we get to have fun? And so I think it's really interesting because I'm coming from the visual arts point of view, and I want to play with these toys, and I don't know how to use them. So let me play with them. So, and I'm interested in, because the title was facilitating artistic practice, and I'm interested in trying to get those two, you know, these opportunities that you've all been talking about, how you're bringing all these creative people and this diversity together. I think that's really interesting.
And have you worked with MadLab at all? Are you from Manchester? Or?
I'm based in Manchester, and I've not actually found it very accessible.
Okay.
And I think there's an interesting, I would actually be quite critical and say, how do you know you're open? You know, you say you're open, but how do you know, how do you test that? Because I think it does select people who walk into the building and are used to that ethos will feel very at home there. Well, I don't know, all those wires and
that's
you know, electrons, I don't even understand how electricity works, you know.
Before we respond on this point, just to say, of course, everything that we make is never perfect, of course. So just before, like, obviously they're trying to make it better. But.
Yes, quite. We would very much like to make the building more accessible. Certainly by, for instance, levelling the floor and installing some proper heating that works. It would be fantastic. I think there's opening the shutters. Well, yeah, exactly. There's still one shutter that's been closed. These are more kind of sort of practical aspects of we run on a budget that's on a shockingly small budget. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we really want to change is the fact that, you know, sort of the people coming into the building, it kind of it self-selects to a certain extent for for people that have a sort of an idea of the aesthetic that's just, you know, that's perhaps not kind of, you know, it's not shiny, put it that way. So yeah, and it certainly kind of it self-selects for people who don't mind things that aren't shiny. And yeah, that can be off-putting. We're doing an awful lot of work to kind of to change that.
Shininess is a problem for me. It's the technology. It's like I'm not techno-savvy. I never learned how to use these kind of things. And so I'm like a simple introduction. You know,
there's an organisation called Muztech that's doing precisely that at the moment. It's open to everyone, and their workshops are absolutely brilliant, and they're designed to facilitate artists to be able to use
Yeah.
I'd really like to know more about
Miztech is generally for women working in technology to help women understand and use technology in an environment where you don't feel that kind of a slight barrier. I wanted to ask you how did you feel what was the inaccessibility? Could you kind of describe whether it was just what you were presented with, or the people?
Those people are very friendly.
Do you want to get that one back there? Thanks.
I think I want to put you on the internet. It's fine, don't worry about it.
I just don't know the terminology. I mean, I use photography a lot in my work, my artwork, and I like pushing the technology, and I like playing photography, and I always have. I think that I was being an actor, and I didn't just know it. But I don't understand how photography works. And so when I talk to real photography people, the language just goes up my head. And it's the same, I'd love to know how to pose. I just don't even know how to ask, what questions to ask. Because I just don't know anything about programming or anything.
Certainly with MadLab, we run various programs. So we have our university program for sort of introduction to coding. We are currently running projects in libraries, which again is sort of introducing sort of women in libraries to coding, electronics, and these kinds of things that with absolutely no background at all. Personally, I'm self-taught, so yeah, absolutely, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I think that probably the easiest thing to do would be to turn over and tap Rachel, who's another MadLabber, on the shoulder, and ask what we're up to. Sometimes, because there's so much stuff that's kind of happening in MadLab, it's kind of difficult to sort of to signpost the things. Okay, you know, if you're coming to this completely new, where do you go? You know, so if you're interested in one thing, where do you go? At the website is kind of it's very chaotic. But yeah, we have all sorts of programs. So Yeah, I think just kind of turning up and talking to people is a good start, and talking to Rachel just over there is a good idea as well. Because yes, we do have these kind of programs in place.
Okay, are we okay to... Do you want to continue conversation after as well with us? That'd be good.
Yeah, I think so.
Do we have a question at the back?
It wasn't so much a question as a follow-up to that artist, because I think in every walk of life, doing what you do to the best of your ability, or doing what you do best, is probably a good precept to follow. So there are coders and programmers out there who are brilliant at what they do and could be brilliant at supporting artists to do what they do. And so that introduction that Gabby was talking about, that connecting people up. Artists don't necessarily have to learn to code or to program in order to do what they do best. But if they can be introduced to people who are brilliant and passionate at that, then a great service has been done in mediating. So if mediating is part of what MadLab and other organisations can do, festivals, those of us who are promoters, producers, then I think that's a valuable thing, rather than us thinking we need to know the language. Those of us who don't, and I'm one of them. I don't feel I need to know the language. I need to know enough language to introduce people to each other.
I think there's I'd advocate that learning to code, even just the beginners stuff, will give you sort of a good fundamental basis for being able to think about the material you're using in a way that would be interesting from a creative perspective. So the more you know if you're a painter, the more you know your materials, your types of varnishes, your canvases, the more you know, the more you can use them in a way that is, interesting and maybe innovative and stuff. So
absolutely,
I feel like that.
But at the same time, I do think, as a lady was just saying, that you already understand the philosophy of the hack in a sense. It's known through performance and many different types of visual arts, and there is no reason why she could not work with somebody who did know that language, because I do think it's about complementing people coming from different areas, and we do work with artists who actually can't see beyond the screen as well, whereas, for example, you're coming from a place where you're used to thinking about audience, you're thinking about context, you're thinking about, so I think they can be there's different ways which we can approach it. There's no straight, there's no one way.
I think there's some potential to do some really interesting stuff.
I'm slightly of the school of thought that everybody should suffer one day of programming in their life. Is that something which, the questioner would consider? Would you consider suffering one day of programming?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I might suffer it, but I wouldn't be brilliant at it.
I think that's perhaps the point which kind of ties these things together. That you wouldn't be brilliant at it. I mean, maybe if I wasn't a programmer, maybe I wouldn't be brilliant at it if I did one day of programming. But you might learn a little bit about when you're asking something from somebody, like how difficult something is, or how they might do this thing, or something like that. I guess that's kind of like where we're trying to draw this connection between the two. Is there's never a very good handoff point where one meets the other. There's no river between these two disciplines where there's a bridge and you go meet on the bridge and you say, I speak in my language, you speak in yours. There always has to be some kind of overlap, and I think maybe what Asa was saying in terms of these introduction to coding things is sometimes an introduction to code is not how to code, but it's just what is code.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that MadLab and the good hack spaces, I think sort of the ones that I like. It's not a monoculture. I have no interest in turning everybody into computer programmers. The most interesting things happen when you get people from different domains that kind of just sort of crunch together, and bring people out of their comfort zones and sort of force them to kind of find out a little bit more about sort of the domains of the people that are working with, so that you can kind of get the most out of those kind of collaborations. So
should we try and get as many questions as possible?
Yes.
I think we'll try and get maybe one. Sorry.
Yeah, like that.
Hello again. It was kind of an observation really to follow that point. I think there's a disconnect between the fact that there's way too many, there isn't way too many artists. There are more artists than there are coders. So coders potentially can seem quite exotic and quite kind of out of reach for people who potentially want to develop their practice. you know, either by collaborating with people who can develop a piece of technology or not. And until technology is more kind of readily available and more readily taught within schools and colleges, and everybody's digital literacy is kind of taking up 20 notches, we're not going to have that kind of democratic approach to technology and kind of art and a mixture between the two. So it's a kind of observation.
It almost sounds like we should be commissioning a Strictly Come Dancing for coding, where we've got one artist and one coder, and we do this initiative. Is that?
But I think
there's something to experiment with, just to see how the problem survives.
I think we're also assuming that all digital artists are programmers and coders. You know, like
right.
There are some great projects that have very little technology that I would say about from digital artists. It's about thinking digitally, but not necessarily fetishizing the technology, which I think are the processes, which I think is what we're doing right now.
Exactly. I think it's also important to say that MadLab is, while the D in MadLab is digital, that's kind of a misnomer because we cover a lot of other bases as well. So we do have photography groups, we have filmmaking groups, we have script writers, we have fiction writing groups, like book clubs, all kinds of other stuff that's sort of running kind of alongside and sort of intertwined with a lot of the kind of the sort of more sort of purely digital side as well. So yeah, absolutely, it's not just about digital.
I mean, one at the back. Can you get the microphone from this side?
Hi, thanks for a really interesting discussion. I've been trying to get to the bottom of what the discussion is about, and the suggestion of a Strictly Come Dancing for artists and coders.
I think it's a provocation.
Is an interesting provocation, and I just wonder, maybe you could expand on that and suggest who would be who would be leading in that dance.
Right.
This exists at Rhizome, which is, and it was just recently, they've got the 7-on-7 project, which is amazing, and they do this very, I don't think they dance.
Okay.
Johnny Ball's Bruce Forsyth, discuss.
But in many ways, 7-on-7, we already have very digitally savvy artists working with a really big company like Foursquare or something like that, and thinking enabling them to think bigger and work in a more commercial form.
Part of what's not being serviced by this, though, it seems to be like these are emerging artists. Well, we've got a lot of people here who are developed artists who are trying to engage with something which is strictly code. Do you think that there's a bit of a distinction there between this room and perhaps? But yeah, I think that these things are kind of either thought experiments, but they're worth trying, right? If it doesn't work in this community, then what works next? Until you try one thing out. I mean, we may as well just do it, right? Maybe next weekend I'll get 5 coders. Well, I don't know. I probably can't. I don't have that many friends.
But we've got something coming up, and it's I can't remember what the final title is now. It's something like hacking empathy, and so that's all about, you know, everyone at some point deals with. You want people to empathise with your content. You want people to empathise with your artwork, with yourselves, with your. So that's got a whole mixed bunch of people together, and we're going to spend a day or two just working on that. But that empathy doesn't sit in any domain, so it's a really nice word for it to hang on.
I think it is really problematic, though, if we're talking about digital practice and facilitating digital practice, that we focus on purely the programming and coding side, because we're not talking about the idea. And the idea is what's going to bring an audience. It's the idea that's going to enable us to champion why digital works are important and emerging technologies should be funded. And we'll get ghettoized and we'll get niched. You know,
Yeah,
and I think it's
perhaps
really
we're really ignoring as well, like that many people now are digital artists implicitly because they're working with tool sets which are digital, and that's transformed the way in which people are working. And we're really running out of time now, so anybody wants to force a question in? James, please, go on.
I can say something.
Yeah, go on.
But I feel like it might be undermining the really good point that you just made.
Well, I don't think there's
you can do, yeah.
Okay. I just think there's a fundamental difference between artists who think with code and artists who make things with code. And I think a lot of artists that think with code, like code is a primary way in which they approach conceptual matter, and they need to code, and that's just how they do it. And there's a lot of artists who make things with code, and they don't necessarily need to understand how it works, they want to understand the output. And I think having that distinction when you approach a project and how it's made and what it means is good when you're asking that question too. So
that's the Jerry Springer moment for the end of the talk.
Okay. I don't want to close your panel though.
No, but that's a really important point because I agree. Like there is definitely a difference between organisations, particularly from a contemporary art side, with the artists that are confronting the digital, but then the artists that are really engaging and working with the tools. And it is about the work, making sure that the two are brought together. But I just think in terms of positioning, and particularly within this context where we have probably a mixture of artists, funders, and that if we talk about purely through the process, we're just missing out on a huge audience and a huge, the opportunities, the varied opportunities and number of opportunities if we just talk about the one.
Do you think is that a problem of mixing definitions? Do you think of selecting something that's quite small problem and putting a big title on it as if this is the whole thing? Perhaps. Okay, I think we're going to have to leave the room now because otherwise there'll be no more discussions today. Anyway, thank you very much.